Hi, I'm Brad Poole. I'm a solutions architect with Comforte. Today we'll be doing a demonstration of CSL's REST and hopefully take about 15 minutes. What we'll be focusing on is taking an existing NonStop application and turning that into a RESTful service. Bit of background, CSL is a broad access capability into the NonStop system. So it provides either high-performing APIs, C#, Java, for example, or it provides capability for more of a standards-based access, so either SOAP or REST, for example. Now today we'll be focusing on turning a pathway server into a RESTful service. Bit of background then about pathway. Most are probably familiar, but two components that we're interested in. One, the primary component, the pathway server, is the business logic, and this is really the smarts that we want to be able to access from our RESTful service. The other component is the SCOBA requester, and this historically has the presentation logic. Our goal really is to bypass the SCOBA requester and go right to the business logic and basically take that the pathway server component and turn that into a RESTful service. Now we want to do that without making any modifications to the pathway server. So that means we have to interface with it exactly as it's currently expecting a SCOBA requester to. That's why it's kind of important to know this basic information. So if we look at it, the job of the SCOBA requester is to collect user information, populate the request message, and send that message up to the pathway server. Now, that message has to conform exactly to that structure that the pathway server is expecting. So that's usually provided in a DDL, data definition language file. That means that whatever we produce and send to it is going to have to comply with that. Now, the other is that it'll have to be over the same interface, the path send interface in this case, up through to the pathway server. So once the pathway server receives the request message, it processes the transaction and returns the results back to the SCOBA requester. All right, so that's the background. Our demo that we're going to be doing is, as I mentioned, on my NonStop system, I've got basically a pathway application, a really simple inventory manager. And so it's a Pathmon and server class environment, but it's also got DDL that describes the request and reply message. So what we're going to be doing is using a tool, a development tool, CSL Studio, to be able to consume that DDL and also provide information about the pathway environment and have it construct what we call a service definition. Now, the service definition is a primary component in generation of SOAP or REST, but also that same service definition can be used to generate the high-performing APIs if we were to choose to do that. For today, we're just going to focus on REST. So what we'll be doing for the third step is to generate a Swagger document, and that's basically for REST. That describes what the service is and what the information around that is provided. We'll also be generating and deploying a CSL REST wrapper, and the wrapper its job is really to be the gateway between the NonStop application and the outside world, the open world out here. So its job is going to be to convert from, for example, a JSON payload into what the pathway server is expecting. So once we've finished step 3 and generated the Swagger document and deployed the wrapper, the next step, fourth and last step, really is to construct a client around that. Now we'll be using some basically off-the-shelf open standard tools to be able to consume that Swagger document and then generate a request message. We'll expect that the SOAP wrapper will convert that JSON message into the native pathway message, and the pathway server will process it and return the results back. So let's jump into it. Step 1 then, as I mentioned, is kind of environmental. We need to understand what our pathway world is. So let me bring it up. I've got, this is basically just terminal emulator access up through to my NonStop system. And we can see that I've started up a pathway process, got Pathmon process, $BPINV, and I've got 4 server classes started up. In particular, I'm going to take getRec, and we're going to turn that into a RESTful service. So that's my pathway information. Now I also have my message structure defined in a DDL. This DDL is fairly simple. Again, it's a really simple inventory manager pathway server used for demo purposes. Pretty simple data structure, but at least it's got some complexity to it, some different types of data entries. And the last thing I want to show you is the SCOBA requester that we're basically replacing. So in this case, if I put in a value here, press F1, then it gets the results back of that particular product ID, and I could do another one and get another value here. Now notice that over here I've got a log of the activity. So when we bypass the SCOBA requester and go directly to the pathway server using our RESTful client, we should be able to see that activity here as well. All right, so that's step one. That's our pathway environment. Step two is to define that service definition. And again, I'll be using CSL Studio to have it access that DDL and provide information about the pathway environment in order to construct that service definition. So let's bring up CSL Studio. And again, it is just a PC-based utility that lets me rapidly develop these services. So I'm going to develop a new service. I need to tell it what my backend server is that I'm dealing with. I don't have any defined, so I'll need to add one. And here it needs to know exactly what the pathway environment is. So if we go back and look again, our pathmon process name is $bpinv, and we're going to be publishing getrec as a RESTful service. So those are the two things we need here, $bpinv and getrec. So that defines my backend service for this operation. So I'll make that association and click Next. Now the next thing I need to do is define operations. So we're only going to have one operation, but obviously we can have multiples. In this case, our operation is just op-get-record. Now I need to tell it what my request and reply message are. I don't have any messages defined yet, so I will go and add them. Now notice I've already pre-configured where my DDL is, so if I click Load, it'll bring it up here, and I can now say, yes, that's the data structure, the message structure that I want to associate with my project. And if we drill down and look at it here, we should be able to see that it is the same data definitions that we had back here with our DDL. So it did in fact go up there, grab this DDL, and it's using that for the message definition. So this particular pathway server has the same message for request and reply. So that defines my operation with my input and output messages. So now I've defined my service definition, and we've got this new guy here. Okay, so we generated, using CSL Studio, we accessed the NonStop, got the DDL, and gave it information about the pathway environment, and we generated a service definition from that. So our next step then is to again use CSL Studio to reference that service definition and generate a REST swagger. Now the swagger document is really important because this is what allows us to abstract client developers from needing to know any information about the NonStop or that it's a pathway server or any of that. So the swagger document is very important. We'll also then be generating from the service definition and deploying a CSL REST wrapper. This is deployed as a pathway server class. And again, this is the job of this wrapper is to act as that gateway between the open world and the REST environment out here and that NonStop application. So that's our third step. Let's go do that with CSL Studio. Oh, here we go. Okay, so what we want to do then is we want to generate, and in this case, I think I mentioned that I can take this service definition and I can do a number of things with it. I could do, like, for example, the high-performing API generation. I could do a SOAP definition for that. They're a client or a server. In our case, we're going to be generating a REST server wrapper. And we need to tell it that that's the guy we want to do it with. Now it's going to generate the Swagger files for us and put those in this location. I want it to go in a different location though. Let's see. So I wanted to put it down here in my REST services folder. Now when I click finish, it is going to go and generate that Swagger document and generate and deploy that the wrapper. And okay, now it says it successfully did that. Let's go take a look at what it built for us. So it just inside here then, it generated, this is our Swagger document. And if we look, we can see that it's got information about the IP address of our nonstop and the port that the CSL is listening to. It's got information about the SOAP wrapper, I'm sorry, the REST wrapper and its function. But it also has information about our operation and also about the data structures associated with this RESTful service. Okay. So we've now generated the Swagger document, took a look at it, and it generated and successfully deployed that wrapper up to my nonstop system. So it is now sitting there waiting for that HTTP request to come up. So our next step then is to take that Swagger document, and in this case I'll be using two open source tools. I'll be using Swagger Editor and also SOAP UI. And these are both very broadly used tools in the open environment for interfacing with RESTful services. So I'm going to use those to construct a client that's going to send a message across. Our REST wrapper will then convert from the JSON payload into the pathway binary message, send that through to the pathway server, and then hopefully we'll get a good response back. So let's do that. I want to first bring up SOAP UI. And I'm going to tell it that I want to generate a new REST service here. And I'm going to import the Swagger document. And let's see, where was that? So we'll browse to where we have our Swagger document. And so it recognizes we've got an operation and that we've got a request message here. So now in this box here, I can either put the JSON request message kind of hand constructed, or I can use another tool. In this case, I'm going to be using Swagger Editor to also have it pull in, import our Swagger document. And it tells us a bunch of information about it, but what we're looking for mostly right now is what that request message looks like. So this is the request message that the Swagger Editor is providing for us. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to just paste that into my SOAP UI project. And I'm going to populate the request message and execute. So that did just successfully send that request up through to my nonstop. We did get it converted and we get a valid response back. Let's do another one here. Okay, so we can see it's getting valid response. And now we should also be able to look inside here and see that our log is showing that activity. So we are successfully accessing up through to the pathway server. Okay, so we were successful. In about 15 minutes, we were able to take our pathway server and publish that as a RESTful service. And thanks to powerful open tools, we were able to construct a client to interface to it. All right, so a bit of summary then. Obviously, this was a fairly simple case, but I think it does demonstrate how you can rapidly deploy a web service using CSL Studio. And I wanted to reemphasize that in addition to REST, you can also do SOAP or the high-performing API access. And that you're also able to do, what we did is we took a pathway server and published it as a RESTful service. We can also generate the ability to have your application, your NonStop application, act as a RESTful client and maybe interface with the cloud. Now, I wanted to emphasize the tools that I use. SOAP UI and Swagger are not comforte products. These are just, since we're conforming with standard, we're able to use off-the-shelf tools for that. So that concludes the demonstration, and thank you very much. Again, I'm Brad Poole, and I'm with comforte. Thank you.